I'm Lucy Martinez, 42 years old, and 6 months ago, a tech recruiter hung up when he heard my voice during what should have been my dream job interview. The rejection stung, but I knew something was wrong when I heard him say, "Oh," before the line went dead. But what the company did next, when I reported the discrimination, was even worse. If you've ever experienced racism in the workplace, please let me know where you're watching from and subscribe to join others who understand this struggle. My journey to that moment began 20 years earlier when I graduated summa cum laude from Howard University with a computer science degree. Growing up in Atlanta, my grandmother used to tell me, "Baby, you gotta be twice as good to get half as much, but that don't mean you stop trying." Those words became my armor. My parents, both educators, filled our house with books and the smell of my mama's cornbread on Sundays after church. They taught me that excellence wasn't optional, it was survival. Starting my career at a small software company in 2003, I was often the only Black woman in every meeting, every conference room, every team photo. I learned to navigate corporate America like a translator, switching between my authentic self and the version that made white colleagues comfortable. My mentor, Mrs. Washington from my church, had worked in corporate banking for 30 years. She taught me to document everything, speak up strategically, and never let them make me small. "Keep your receipts, baby," she'd say, because they'll try to rewrite history. I excelled despite the microaggressions, being asked to speak for all Black people in diversity meetings, having my ideas credited to male colleagues, being told I was articulate like it was a surprise. I published 3 research papers on machine learning algorithms, led teams that increased efficiency by 40%, and earned my MBA while working full-time. By 2019, I was a senior data scientist earning 6 figures, respected by peers, and mentoring young women of color entering tech. My community celebrated every promotion like a family victory. At my church, Mount Olive Baptist, I sponsored coding workshops for high school students. Sunday dinners at my parents' house became strategy sessions where my father, aunts, and cousins shared stories of breaking barriers in their own fields. We understood that individual success served the collective. Every door I opened made space for others. By 2024, I had reached the peak of my career. I was managing a team of 12 developers, speaking at tech conferences, and being recruited by major companies. My reputation for innovative solutions and team leadership was solid. I owned my home, had healthy savings, and was planning to start my own consulting firm. The future felt limitless until I decided to explore opportunities at Technova, a prestigious Silicon Valley startup known for its cutting-edge culture. The first red flag appeared during the application process. Despite my qualifications clearly exceeding their requirements, I noticed longer response times compared to what my white colleagues described. During virtual meetings with the hiring team, I caught subtle expressions when my camera turned on, the slight pause, the forced smiles, the way conversations shifted. But I pushed forward, believing my track record would speak louder than their biases. The day everything changed started like any other Tuesday. I had prepared for weeks for the final interview with their chief technology officer, Howard Hamilton. My portfolio was flawless, my presentation polished, my confidence high. I had spoken to 3 other team members who seemed excited about my potential contributions. This call was supposed to be a formality before the offer. Howard Hamilton and I had communicated only through email and video calls, where I kept my camera off due to connectivity issues in my building. My voice, while professional, carried the subtle cadences of my Atlanta upbringing, something I had learned to modulate but never completely hide. When I called the number provided, Howard answered immediately. "Good morning. This is Lucy Martinez calling for our 10 a.m. interview," I said warmly. There was a pause. Then, "Oh, I think there's been some mistake." "No mistake. I'm Lucy Martinez, the data scientist. We've been emailing about the senior developer position." Another pause, longer this time. I could hear him breathing. "Right. Lucy, I see. Well, actually, I just realized we've already filled that position. We should have notified you sooner." My heart sank, but I maintained my professionalism. "I spoke with Sarah from your team yesterday, and she confirmed this interview was still on." Could there have been a miscommunication? No, no. The position is definitely filled. We'll be in touch if anything else opens up. Click. I stared at my phone, feeling the familiar burn of realization wash over me. This wasn't about qualifications. This wasn't about timing. This was about the moment my voice revealed my identity, and his expectations collided with reality. I immediately called Sarah from their team, who seemed confused and apologetic, confirming that no position had been filled and that Howard had been looking forward to our conversation. That's when I knew I had a problem much bigger than one racist recruiter. Growing up in the Martinez household meant learning to recognize racism early and respond strategically. My great grandmother had cleaned houses for white families while putting her children through college during Jim Crow. My grandmother integrated her workplace in the 1960s, enduring threats and isolation. My mother fought for equitable funding in public schools throughout the 1980s and 90s. Each generation had passed down wisdom about surviving and thriving despite systemic oppression. Our family gatherings were masterclasses in resistance. Around my grandmother's dining table, over plates of fried chicken and collard greens, we learned the difference between the racism that burns loud and the kind that kills softly with smiles. They'll smile in your face and stab you in the back, my Aunt Carol used to say, but document everything because memory isn't evidence. In my professional life, I had become expert at code switching, the ability to navigate between my authentic self and the version that corporate America could digest. In meetings with white colleagues, my voice carried different rhythms, my posture shifted slightly, my enthusiasm became measured. It was exhausting performance art that every Black professional knows intimately. But I had built credibility through excellence, thinking that competence could shield me from the most blatant discrimination. The morning after Howard Hamilton hung up on me, I woke up with that familiar heaviness in my chest, the weight of knowing that no matter how qualified I was, how hard I worked, how perfectly I performed, my Blackness would always be seen as a problem to solve rather than an asset to celebrate. But I had been raised by women who turned pain into power, so I began documenting everything. I started with the obvious evidence: email threads confirming my interview, Sarah's messages expressing excitement about my candidacy, and the job posting that perfectly matched my qualifications. Then I dug deeper. I researched Technova's leadership team and discovered not a single Black executive among their 50-person management team. Their diversity page featured stock photos of smiling Black faces, but their actual workforce told a different story. Howard Hamilton had been careless. Our email exchange created a paper trail of enthusiasm that contradicted his sudden position elimination story. I forwarded our entire conversation to my personal email and began crafting a formal complaint to their HR department. My years of corporate experience had taught me to speak their language: calm, professional, focused on policy violations rather than hurt feelings. My first call to Technova's HR department reached Jennifer Walsh, their Director of People Operations. I explained the situation clearly, providing specific dates, times, and documentation. Jennifer listened with practiced sympathy, making appropriate sounds of concern, while I described Howard's sudden change in attitude when he heard my voice. "I can absolutely understand your frustration, Lucy," Jennifer said in that carefully modulated tone HR professionals perfect. "Let me look into this situation and get back to you. Sometimes there are internal communications that candidates aren't aware of, and I want to make sure we have the full picture before drawing any conclusions." The gaslighting began immediately. Jennifer called back 2 days later with the explanation that insulted my intelligence. After speaking with Howard, it appears there was a miscommunication about the timeline. The position had been filled internally just that morning, and Howard was caught off guard by the timing. He absolutely meant no disrespect, and we apologize for the confusion. When I pointed out that Sarah had confirmed the position was still open the day before my interview, Jennifer's tone shifted slightly. "Well, Sarah might not have been aware of the internal decision. These things happen quickly in startup environments. We certainly appreciate your interest and encourage you to apply for future opportunities." I hung up that call feeling a familiar rage that every Black woman knows: the anger that comes from being treated like you're stupid, like you can't recognize a lie when it's wrapped in corporate speak. But anger without strategy is just noise, and I had been trained by generations of strategic fighters. My next move was reaching out to my network. Through LinkedIn, I discovered 3 other Black candidates who had similar experiences with Technova in the past year. Maria Thompson, a Black product manager from Oakland, had been told her position was eliminated after a video interview where her camera worked perfectly. James Wilson, a Black software engineer from Chicago, received a rejection email 30 minutes after a phone screen where he mentioned attending Morehouse College. We began comparing notes, sharing emails, and building a pattern of evidence that would be impossible to explain away with corporate excuses. This wasn't isolated incidents. This was systematic exclusion with a thin veneer of plausible deniability. The second escalation came when I reached out to Technova's chief diversity officer, Patricia Clark, a white woman who had recently written a LinkedIn article about their commitment to inclusive hiring. I sent her a detailed email outlining the pattern of discrimination we had documented, including specific examples and requesting a formal investigation. Patricia's response arrived 3 days later, copied to Jennifer Walsh and two other executives I hadn't contacted. Her tone was defensive and dismissive. While we take all concerns seriously, I want to clarify that correlation does not imply causation. Technova has rigorous hiring processes that focus solely on qualifications and cultural fit. The situations you've described reflect the competitive nature of our industry, not discriminatory practices. She continued, I would encourage you to consider that our interview process may have revealed gaps in your candidacy that weren't immediately apparent from your resume. We maintain high standards, and sometimes candidates who look good on paper don't translate to our specific needs during live conversations. The audacity was breathtaking. Patricia was essentially arguing that four highly qualified Black candidates all happened to have mysterious gaps that only became apparent when our race was revealed through video or voice interactions. She was gaslighting us with advanced degrees and corporate buzzwords, but gaslighting nonetheless. Humidity is my community rallied around me during this phase. Every Sunday at Mount Olive Baptist, church members shared their own stories of workplace discrimination, offering advice, connections, and unwavering support. My pastor, Reverend Matthews, reminded us during his sermon that speaking truth to power isn't comfortable, but it's necessary for change. My neighbor, Mrs. Williams, who had fought housing discrimination in the 1970s, stopped by with a casserole and strategic advice. Baby, they gon' try to make you look crazy, angry, or incompetent. Don't let them control the narrative. Document everything. Stay professional and find allies who can't be dismissed as easily. At this point, I contacted civil rights attorney David Hill, who specialized in employment discrimination. David reviewed my documentation and immediately saw the pattern. This is textbook discrimination, he said, during our first consultation. They're relying on the fact that most people won't push back or won't have the resources to fight, but they've been sloppy, and you've been thorough. The third escalation happened when Technova decided to go on the offensive. 2 weeks after my conversation with Patricia Clark, I received a certified letter from their legal department claiming that my harassment of their employees was creating a hostile work environment and demanding that I cease all contact with their company. The letter, signed by their general counsel Brian Martinez, painted me as an unstable candidate who couldn't accept rejection professionally. They claimed that my repeated attempts to contact multiple employees and my allegations of discrimination without basis constituted potential defamation and harassment. It was a classic intimidation tactic designed to silence victims of discrimination, and it might have worked if I hadn't been prepared for it. My attorney David immediately responded with our own letter, formally notifying Technova that we were considering legal action for racial discrimination and retaliation. The company's response was swift and telling. Within days, I received LinkedIn messages from current Technova employees warning me that management was telling staff to avoid engaging with me online. Someone had clearly instructed their team to create distance from the problematic candidate who wouldn't go away quietly, but they had miscalculated. Their heavy-handed legal threats and internal damage control efforts only strengthened our case. David filed a formal complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, and the story began gaining attention in tech diversity circles. My church family organized a letter-writing campaign to Technova's investors, highlighting the company's discriminatory practices and requesting accountability. The Black Tech Professionals group on LinkedIn began sharing the story, and suddenly Technova was facing public scrutiny they weren't prepared to handle. The final straw came when Technova's CEO, William Peterson, decided to personally address the situation. In a company-wide email that was leaked to me by a sympathetic employee, Peterson wrote, "Recent allegations against our company are unfounded and damage the reputation we've worked hard to build. While we support diversity, we won't tolerate attempts to manipulate our hiring process through false claims of discrimination." Peterson went further, suggesting that candidates who play the race card when rejected lack the resilience necessary for startup environments. He positioned Technova as the victim of a coordinated attack by people who couldn't compete on merit alone. The email was a gift. Peterson had put his racist attitudes in writing, distributed company-wide, and created indisputable evidence of retaliation. When the email was forwarded to my attorney, David smiled for the first time since we'd started working together. "This case just became much easier," he said. "They've moved from plausible deniability to open hostility. William Peterson just wrote our closing argument for us." The media strategy shifted immediately. With Peterson's email as evidence of systemic bias, several tech journalists began investigating Technova's hiring practices. The story expanded beyond my individual case to examine the broader pattern of exclusion in Silicon Valley hiring. Community pressure intensified when the NAACP Silicon Valley chapter issued a statement condemning Technova's response and calling for a comprehensive audit of their employment practices. Local Black churches organized an economic boycott, encouraging members to avoid Technova's products and share the story within their networks. The momentum was building toward confrontation, but this time we had allies, evidence, and public attention that Technova couldn't control or dismiss. The confrontation I had been building toward finally arrived in the form of a formal mediation hearing scheduled by the EEOC. The session was held in a sterile conference room in downtown San Francisco, with representatives from both sides, federal mediators, and attorneys present. Technova had clearly hoped this would remain a private matter they could resolve quietly, but the public attention made that impossible. Present in the room were William Peterson, Technova's CEO, Brian Martinez, their general counsel, Jennifer Walsh from HR, Patricia Clark, their chief diversity officer, my attorney David Hill, EEOC mediator Sarah Rodriguez, and me. Outside, members of my church and the Black Tech Professionals Group held a prayer vigil and peaceful demonstration that drew local news coverage. Technova's strategy became clear immediately. Brian Martinez opened by portraying me as a disgruntled candidate who couldn't handle rejection professionally. Ms. Martinez's qualifications, while impressive on paper, simply didn't translate to the specific needs of our organization, he argued. Her subsequent campaign of harassment and false allegations represents exactly the kind of behavior that makes her unsuitable for our collaborative culture. They had prepared a defense that attacked my character rather than addressing the evidence of discrimination. Jennifer Walsh testified that hiring decisions were based solely on merit and cultural fit, while Patricia Clark insisted that their diversity initiatives proved their commitment to inclusion. William Peterson took the stand with the confidence of a man who had never been held accountable for his actions. He described me as clearly talented but not the right fit for our team dynamic. When asked about Howard Hamilton hanging up on me, Peterson claimed it was a miscommunication that had been blown out of proportion by someone seeking to benefit from false allegations. The institutional protection was complete. They had circled the wagons, prepared talking points, and committed to a strategy of character assassination rather than accountability. It was systemic racism with corporate lawyers and diversity consultants providing cover, but they had underestimated our preparation and the power of the truth. David began our response by playing the recorded phone call with Howard Hamilton that I had legally captured during our conversation. State law allowed single-party consent recording, and I had documented everything from the beginning. The recording was devastating. Howard shocked when he heard my voice, followed by his immediate fabrication about the position being filled. The room fell silent as Howard's voice filled the space. "Oh, I think there's been some mistake." The timeline David presented was irrefutable. Sarah's emails confirming the interview, the job posting remaining active for weeks after my rejection, and the subsequent hiring of a white candidate with fewer qualifications painted a clear picture of discrimination. Then David presented the pattern evidence, testimonies from Maria Thompson, James Wilson, and 2 other Black candidates who had experienced similar treatment. Phone logs, email threads, and hiring data showed that Technova had interviewed dozens of Black candidates over 2 years but hired none for senior positions. The smoking gun was William Peterson's company-wide email dismissing discrimination claims and attacking candidates who play the race card. David read it aloud, watching Peterson's face redden with each word. "This is the voice of institutional racism," David declared. "Not robes and burning crosses, but suits and conference rooms where Black excellence is seen as a threat to be eliminated." EOC mediator Sarah Rodriguez took control of the room. Based on the evidence presented, there appears to be a clear pattern of discriminatory hiring practices at Technova. The recorded conversation, email evidence, and systematic exclusion of qualified Black candidates suggests violations of federal employment law, she continued. Furthermore, the company's response to these allegations, including legal threats and public statements attacking the complainant's character, constitutes retaliation, which is separately actionable under federal law. The room's energy shifted completely. Technova's legal team huddled frantically, while Peterson sat in stunned silence. Their strategy of denial and victim blaming had collapsed under the weight of documented evidence and systematic analysis. The victory came in multiple forms. The EEOC ruled that probable cause existed for discrimination and retaliation claims, opening the door for federal prosecution. Technova faced potential lawsuits from multiple candidates, Department of Justice investigation, and loss of federal contracts due to civil rights violations. But the real justice was broader than legal victory. Within 30 days, Technova agreed to a comprehensive settlement that included immediate termination of Howard Hamilton and formal censure of William Peterson, implementation of mandatory bias training for all hiring managers, third-party auditing of hiring practices for 2 years, establishment of a $2 million fund for diversity initiatives and candidate compensation, and public apology and commitment to accountability measures. The personal vindication felt overwhelming. My professional reputation was not only restored but enhanced by my willingness to fight for justice. The tech community rallied around me, and job offers began pouring in from companies that valued my skills and respected my courage. Most importantly, the precedent was set. Other companies began reviewing their own hiring practices, afraid of facing similar public scrutiny and legal consequences. The message was clear. Systematic discrimination would no longer be tolerated or ignored. The immediate aftermath of victory brought complex emotions I hadn't expected. Relief mixed with exhaustion as months of stress finally began lifting from my shoulders. The validation felt powerful. My community, my family, and the legal system had confirmed that what I experienced was real, wrong, and actionable. But the fight had taken its toll, and healing would require intentional effort and time. My church community celebrated like we had won the Super Bowl. Sunday service the week after the settlement featured testimonies from members who had faced similar workplace discrimination, creating a powerful moment of collective recognition and support. Pastor Matthews preached about David facing Goliath, reminding us that sometimes God calls us to fight battles bigger than ourselves for the benefit of others. Technova implemented changes faster than anyone expected. Within 60 days, they hired a new head of diversity, a Black woman with 15 years of experience in tech inclusion. Their hiring processes were completely overhauled, requiring diverse interview panels and systematic bias training for all managers. Most significantly, they began actively recruiting from historically Black colleges and universities, partnerships that should have existed years earlier. The ripple effects extended throughout Silicon Valley. Other startups began examining their own hiring data, discovering similar patterns of exclusion they had previously ignored or rationalized. Investment firms started asking portfolio companies about diversity metrics and anti-discrimination policies. The conversation shifted from whether bias existed to what concrete steps would address it, but change at the institutional level required ongoing vigilance. 3 months after our settlement, I was invited to join Technova's newly formed Diversity Advisory Board, a role I accepted to ensure their commitments translated into sustained action rather than temporary PR moves. Real cultural change takes years, not months, and someone had to monitor progress with authority to speak up when old patterns re-emerged. My personal growth during this period surprised me. Fighting racism publicly had forced me to develop new skills in media engagement, legal advocacy, and community organizing. I found myself speaking at conferences about workplace discrimination, mentoring other professionals facing similar challenges, and consulting with companies seeking to improve their hiring practices. The mentorship role felt particularly meaningful. Young Black professionals reached out regularly, sharing their own experiences with discrimination and seeking advice on documentation, legal options, and emotional resilience. I created a monthly meetup group in Oakland where we shared strategies, provided mutual support, and celebrated each other's victories. My relationship with risk changed fundamentally. Before this experience, I had played corporate politics carefully, avoiding confrontation and focusing on individual advancement. Now I understood that strategic resistance was not only necessary but sustainable when backed by community support and legal protection. Other people's comfort could no longer be my priority when justice was at stake. The ongoing vigilance required to maintain progress became a shared responsibility across multiple communities. The Black Tech Professionals Group established a quarterly review process to monitor Technova's hiring data and hold them accountable to their commitments. We created a database tracking diversity hiring across Silicon Valley companies, making patterns of exclusion harder to hide or rationalize. Legal advocacy expanded beyond my individual case. David Hill and I partnered with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to create a resource guide for tech workers facing discrimination, including template documentation systems and referral networks for legal representation. The guide has been downloaded thousands of times and cited in similar cases across the country. 6 months after the settlement, Technova released their annual diversity report, showing significant improvement in hiring and retention of Black professionals. Their leadership team now included 3 Black executives. Their entry-level hiring was 23% Black compared to 3% previously, and their retention rates had improved across all demographics. Progress was measurable and sustained. But vigilance remains essential because institutional change is fragile and requires constant reinforcement. Monthly check-ins with Technova's diversity team ensure policies are being followed, not just written. Anonymous feedback systems allow employees to report bias incidents without fear of retaliation. External auditing continues to verify that improvements are real, not just statistical manipulation. The legacy we're building extends beyond individual companies to industry-wide transformation. My story has been featured in Harvard Business Review, Wired Magazine, and numerous diversity conferences as a case study in effective resistance to workplace discrimination. The publicity has encouraged other victims to speak up and provided a roadmap for successful advocacy. Network building became crucial for sustaining change over time. We established partnerships with civil rights organizations, professional associations, and legal advocates that create ongoing pressure for accountability. These relationships ensure that discrimination cases don't exist in isolation, but contribute to broader patterns of advocacy and reform. Educational efforts now reach beyond individual companies to business schools, professional development programs, and industry associations. I regularly speak to MBA students about recognizing and addressing bias in hiring practices. These conversations plant seeds that will grow into anti-racist leadership as these students advance in their careers. The community empowerment that emerged from this fight represents perhaps the most important victory. Our success proved that systematic discrimination can be defeated when victims refuse to accept injustice quietly, document everything carefully, and build coalitions powerful enough to demand accountability. For my community, this victory provided a template for strategic resistance that balances individual dignity with collective progress. We learned that fighting racism requires more than moral indignation. It demands legal knowledge, community support, media strategy, and sustained pressure over time. But when these elements combine effectively, even powerful institutions can be forced to change. The lesson for Black professionals facing discrimination is clear. You have more power than you realize, but only if you're willing to use it strategically. Document everything from the beginning, build relationships with other people who share your experiences. Understand your legal rights, and don't hesitate to enforce them. Most importantly, remember that your individual fight contributes to collective progress that benefits everyone who comes after you. Recognition of racism requires trusting your instincts while gathering objective evidence. When something feels wrong, it probably is, but feelings aren't enough to win legal battles or change institutional policies. Email threads, recorded conversations, hiring data, and witness testimony create the foundation for successful advocacy. Start documenting from the first red flag, not after the crisis becomes undeniable. Strategic thinking means playing the long game rather than reacting emotionally to immediate provocations. Institutional racism depends on victims either accepting mistreatment silently or responding in ways that can be dismissed as unprofessional. Strategic resistance maintains moral authority while building legal and public pressure that institutions cannot ignore or deflect. Cultural strength provides the resilience necessary for sustained fights against powerful opponents. My grandmother's wisdom, my church community's support, and my family's encouragement gave me emotional resources that no company could destroy or diminish. Staying connected to community and cultural identity prevents isolation and provides perspective that individual struggles serve collective advancement. Legal knowledge empowers victims to enforce their rights rather than hoping institutions will do the right thing voluntarily. Understanding federal employment law, state recording regulations, and civil rights enforcement procedures transformed my case from complaints to actionable violations with serious consequences. For anyone facing workplace discrimination right now, know that you have options and you have allies. Contact the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to understand your rights. Document everything in writing, including dates, times, witnesses, and specific incidents. Connect with civil rights organizations, professional associations, and legal advocates who can provide support and resources. Build networks with other professionals who share your experiences and can provide mutual support during difficult fights. Join professional associations, attend networking events, and maintain relationships that can provide advice, references, and advocacy when needed. Individual resistance is possible, but collective action is powerful. Share your story when you're ready, but remember that public advocacy comes with costs as well as benefits. Media attention can accelerate institutional change, but also invite scrutiny and potential retaliation. Prepare carefully, work with experienced advocates, and ensure you have legal protection before going public with discrimination claims. Community building creates the foundation for sustained change that extends beyond individual cases. The relationships we built during this fight continue supporting other professionals facing discrimination. Our monthly meetups provide safe spaces for sharing experiences, developing strategies, and celebrating victories together. Resource sharing ensures that knowledge and tools developed through individual fights benefit the broader community. Legal strategies, documentation templates, media contacts, and advocacy networks become resources that make future fights more effective and less isolating. The pride I feel in my heritage has never been stronger. This fight reminded me that I come from people who faced much worse discrimination with far fewer resources and still found ways to survive, resist, and advance. Every generation of my family has fought for dignity and opportunity, and their sacrifices make my success possible. Community strength sustained me through the most difficult moments of this battle. When Technova tried to isolate and intimidate me, my church family, professional network, and cultural community provided emotional support and strategic advice that no institution could undermine or destroy. The intergenerational connection between my fight and my ancestors' struggles provided perspective and motivation that transformed individual frustration into collective resistance. Understanding that I was continuing battles they started and advancing fights that future generations will continue gave meaning to sacrifice and pain. Future vision drives continued advocacy even when individual justice has been achieved. The young Black professionals I mentor today will face different challenges than I did, but they'll face them with better tools, stronger networks, and clearer legal precedents because of the fights we're winning now. If you're watching this video because you've experienced workplace discrimination, know that your story matters and your resistance makes a difference. Document everything, build community support, understand your legal rights, and don't let anyone convince you that racism is acceptable or inevitable. You have power, and when you use it strategically, you can force institutions to change. Subscribe to this channel to stay connected with others fighting for workplace justice. Share your experiences in the comments so we can build community and learn from each other's strategies. Together, we can create workplaces where talent and character matter more than race or background. The fight for racial justice in corporate America continues, but each victory makes the next one easier. Your willingness to speak up, stand up, and show up creates space for others to do the same. Individual courage becomes collective power when we support each other and refuse to accept discrimination as the price of professional success. Remember that change is possible, justice is achievable, and your voice matters in the fight for equality. The institutions that profit from discrimination are powerful, but they're not more powerful than communities united for justice. Keep fighting, keep supporting each other, and keep believing that the future can be better than the past. The conversation continues in the comments, in our communities, and in every workplace where people refuse to accept racism as normal. Thank you for watching, thank you for caring, and thank you for being part of the solution.